Hello, I'm Andrew Klavan, and I'm here in Hollywood. And I have a serious face today. And when I have a serious face, it's very serious because I'm in Hollywood. Usually I say funny things with a funny face and then we all laugh, but today I'm serious. And that means you have to take me seriously. Sometimes I may even have emotions, and then it's very serious because my emotions aren't ordinary emotions, they're Hollywood emotions. And Hollywood emotions make me an expert on things. When I have Hollywood emotions, I become an expert on healthcare and gun control and anything else I want to talk about with my emotions. And you have to take me seriously because I'm in Hollywood and I have a serious face and emotions. Now, some of you may say, wait, why do we have to take you seriously just because you have a serious face and emotions? Shouldn't we calm down and get past our emotions so we can think clearly and make good decisions? But I say no. And when I say no, it's not an ordinary no. It's a no from Hollywood, so it's important. I say if you care, now is the time to make decisions while you're emotional. Because if you calm down, then you might think and gather facts. And if you think and gather facts, you might stop taking me seriously. And you have to take me seriously because I'm in Hollywood and I have a serious face. There are others among you who probably say, well, we have a Constitution and we should probably follow the law set down in our Constitution. But is the Constitution from Hollywood? Does the Constitution have a serious Hollywood face with emotions? How can we show we care if we're always obeying the Constitution instead of thinking about my emotions here in Hollywood? So today, no matter what happens, remember three things. I have a serious face, I have emotions, and I'm in Hollywood. So what I say is important, even though it's complete crap. Trigger warning, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is The Andrew Klavan Show. See, I can be Jimmy Kimmel. he's getting 10 million bucks for that, for doing that. It's the mailbag day. That's more importantly, it is the mailbag day. You know, and here's what we're going to talk about: guns. You know, I've been putting it off when this terrible thing happened in Vegas to begin with. I said I didn't want to politicize it. I wanted to find out what the police are doing. Yesterday, I talked about what the left was doing. Today, they want to talk about guns. Let's talk about guns. I'm going to read you one of the best pieces that was written. I think the best piece that was written yesterday about this. But before we talk about that, I mentioned the mailbag, and we have Tickety-Boo News. You know, I don't want to constantly talk about Jimmy Kimmel, but he really has become, CNN said, how did Jimmy Kimmel become our conscience? It's like CNN, Jimmy Kimmel is your conscience, you know? I mean, if your conscience is Jimmy Kimmel, like mine's Jerry Lewis, okay? It's like my conscience is just making funny faces and funny voices. But, you know, Jimmy Kimmel has really sunk. He's really become kind of weaselly at this point. You know, he has that thing that the left has where they think the First Amendment not only protects their freedom of speech, which it does. I don't want Jimmy Kimmel to have to shut up or anything like that. But they think it also protects them from criticism and the consequences of the things they say. So people are picking on him, and Kimmel's response is to accuse all of us who disagree with him of essentially being accessories before the fact. Here's Kimmel with his usual emotionalism. You know, they say Kimmel is getting his talking points from Chuck Schumer. I guess they're right. That sounds just like him. All right, but here's what Kimmel really said.
I'm not going to get deep into it again tonight. I said what I had to say last night, but I do want to say something to these nuts who spent most of the day today on television and online attacking those of us who think we need to do something about the fact that 59 innocent people were killed. They say it's inappropriate to be talking about it because it's too soon. Well, maybe it's too soon for you, because deep down inside, you know, in your heart, you know you bear some responsibility for the fact that almost anyone can get any weapon they want. Now you want to cover yourself until the storm of outrage passes. You can go back to your dirty business as usual, but it's not too soon for us because we're Americans, and last time I checked, the First Amendment is at least as important as the Second Amendment.
Oh, yeah, well... So we're going back to our dirty business here. We're back to our dirty business defending the Second Amendment and disagreeing with Jimmy Kimmel. I mean, that's what he's complaining about. Nobody said, you know, shut Jimmy Kimmel down. Nobody said, you know, he can't have his stupid show where he abuses the publicly owned airways. Instead of delivering the comedy that he's being paid for, he delivers this kind of garbage where he now has just told all the people in this country who believe in the Second Amendment that they are, you know, complicit in the slaughter in Vegas. Just to have one more voice in there, Steve Scalise, again, the congressman who was shot and nearly killed by the Bernie Bro shooter at the softball game in D.C., he says this has fortified his pro-Second Amendment opinions.
First of all, you've got to recognize that, when there's a tragedy like this, the first thing we should be thinking about is praying for the people who were injured and doing whatever we can to help them, to help law enforcement. We shouldn't first be thinking of promoting our political agenda. And I think we see too much of that where people say, okay, now you have to have gun control. Well, first of all, look at some of those bills. Those bills wouldn't have done anything to stop this. I mean, the gunmen actually cleared background checks. Yeah. So to promote some kind of gun control, I think, is the wrong way to approach this. And frankly, what I experienced was when there was a shooter, luckily we had Capitol Police there with their own guns. Every single day in America, regular citizens that just have a passionate belief in the Second Amendment, that have their own guns, use guns every single day to protect themselves against criminals. And those stories never get told or hardly ever get told. But that's a different side of the story that I think is important, that people use guns way more to defend themselves from criminals than criminals using guns to hurt people.
To bring Scalise's point home, Kimmel says that he's gotten all this blowback from Trump supporters, so he's had to increase security. Now, I think we all know that those security guys are carrying guns, right? I used to live, I really do live in Hollywood, and my next door neighbor used to be one of the biggest stars out here. And I won't expose who he was because I think just because you happen to live next to me doesn't give me the right. Your home should be like a castle. I don't want to dox the guy, it's like just, so it doesn't matter who it was, but it was a very liberal, big star, very nice in all our dealings, with him, but a very avid anti-gun campaigner. Every single day, men with guns came into that house to protect that house and to protect that person who was a major, major celebrity. The gunman even called up my wife and told her that they would be watching our house as well, because their house is obviously, because much bigger star, they had this huge mansion kind of looking down on us. But they said, if there's any trouble there, we'll be happy to come over. I thought that was great. I thought that was really good. But, the point is, I can't afford to have bodyguards. I get threatened. I get people who wish I was dead and all that stuff. And ordinary people, obviously, the people in Vegas, they're not movie stars. We can't all afford the security that Jimmy Kimmel has. We carry guns for protection. We hold guns for protection. This is the same thing, and maybe it's just that we like guns. Maybe some people just have guns because they like them, but most people are trying to be safer. So there's a lot of hypocrisy and all that crying and all that blaming people and all that cursing people out and calling them nuts and saying that they are part of this dirty business and somehow complicit in this massacre. It's a weasel thing to do. It is a really nasty, low, despicable thing to do. So let me read you what I just thought was an unbelievably great piece from Charles Cook. Charlie Cook is what I like about Charlie Cook is he's British born. I don't know if he's become an American citizen, but he knows more. I've been on cruises with him and panels with him, and he just knows a lot about the First Amendment and all this stuff. But he wrote a piece yesterday called "The Right to Bear Arms Isn't Up for Debate." Okay, and let me just read. I want to read as much of this piece as I can, and I'll interrupt myself to talk about some other things. But he begins by saying, when debating the wisdom of the Constitution's Second Amendment, the media tends to start from the presumption that the question is purely scientific and that the answers can and should be derived from statistical analyses and relentless experimentation. And let me stop right there, because there was another article out yesterday from a statistician who said, after researching gun violence, I no longer believe in gun control. This is a woman named Leah Labresco, who is a liberal, formerly of Nate Silver's 538 site, where they gather all the information, a lot of the electoral statistics. She crunched the numbers in a study of all 33,000 gun homicides in the United States annually. She went in thinking that the usual liberal menu of anti-gun policies would reduce that number dramatically. She came out concluding that the only selling point of anti-gun policies is that gun owners hate them. You know how we on the right with Trump are being accused of only doing things to make liberals cry? She says this is the only reason to do this. And here's what she said. I researched the strictly tightened gun laws in Britain and Australia and concluded that they didn't prove much about what America's policy should be. Neither nation experienced drops in mass shootings or other gun-related crime that could be attributed to their buybacks and bans. Mass shootings were too rare in Australia for their absence after the buyback program to be clear evidence of progress. And in both Australia and Britain, the gun restrictions had an ambiguous effect on other gun-related crimes or deaths. When I looked at the other off-praise policies, I found that no gun owner walks into the store to buy an assault weapon. Finally, someone on the left figures this out. It's an invented classification that includes any semi-automatic that has 2 or more features, such as a bayonet mount, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher mount, a folding stock, or a pistol grip. But guns are modular, and any hobbyist can easily add these features at home, just as if they were snapping together Legos. That's one of the things that this guy did. He had, what are they called, bump stocks. And you don't even need a bump stock to turn a semi-automatic into an automatic. It's really a question of handling the recoil. So she goes on to say, as my coworkers and I kept looking at the data, it seemed less and less clear that one broad gun control restriction could make a big difference. 2/3 of gun deaths in the United States every year are suicides. This is what happens when a liberal looks at facts. Suddenly they become us. What is a conservative? A conservative is a liberal who looks at facts. All right, let me get back to this Charlie Cook piece, because I think it's just excellent. This is the Second Amendment is not up for debate. He says the statistical approach is mistaken. The right of the people to keep and bear arms is not the product of the latest research fads or exquisitely tortured data journalism, but a natural extension of the Lockean principles on which this country was founded. It must be protected as such. The Declaration of Independence presumes that all men enjoy certain inalienable rights, and among them are life and liberty. Practically speaking, at both the state level as a bulwark against tyranny and at the individual level as a means by which to protect oneself, this necessitates the auxiliary right to the private ownership of arms, which in the common law that preceded the Second Amendment was understood to include personal weapons. In other words, because of the theories and the ideas that were built up over centuries that ended with the Lockean point of view about natural law, we have a right, a God-given right. Remember, these rights were endowed by our Creator to life and liberty. And part of those rights, to defend your liberty and to defend your life, you need to be able to be armed, okay? And I'm going to pause here again. Here is a brief clip of Chuck Todd saying what everybody on the left is saying is we need to act now because we're emotional, and now is the time to just act on our emotions. So here's Chuck Todd saying this, and I'll tell you why I play it in just a sec.
This is exactly the time to start talking about any issue, gun violence included. If we wait until cooler heads prevail on any of these, we never talk about it. And in fact, if we applied the same logic to every other debate and every other crisis that this country faces that we do to the gun debate, we never would have focused on any of those issues either.
We can't wait till cooler heads prevail. If cooler heads prevail, we'll look at facts and numbers. Now, the reason I wanted to play this is because I also wanted to play something I've been meaning to play since last week. Remember the guy in Alabama, Roy Moore, who is a very religious, very openly religious guy, is always talking about God when he gives speeches, quoting the Bible when he gives speeches. He talked about how our rights come from God, and that is what it says in the Declaration of Independence. We are endowed by our Creator. Our Creator, this is going to surprise you, but our Creator is actually not Barack Obama. Our Creator is God. He endowed us with these rights. He made us. They are self-evident rights, among them life and liberty. Here is Chuck Todd reacting, the same Chuck Todd who just told you not to wait till cooler heads prevail, reacting to Roy Moore's winning the primary in Alabama.
Roy Moore, where the phrase Christian conservative doesn't even begin to describe him, could very well be your next U.S. Senator. And if you don't understand just how freaked out some folks in the GOP and the White House are about what that means, then you don't know Roy Moore. First off, he doesn't appear to believe in the Constitution as it's written.
Our rights don't come from government. They don't come from a Bill of Rights. They come from Almighty God.
Now, that's just a taste of what are very fundamentalist views that have gotten him removed from office twice as Alabama's Chief Justice.
I'm sorry, I'm speechless. I was like, I haven't listened to that cut for a week, but when I first played it, I was speechless. And there is Chuck Todd, who thinks that when, like Jimmy Kimmel, he thinks that if his face is facing a camera, he must know something, or why would they be pointing a camera at him? And Roy Moore says, what is foundational, it is foundational, it is the bottom block in the Jenga tower of America that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And the argument that Charles Cook is making is that that endowment necessitates that we have guns, necessitates that we can protect ourselves. And there is Chuck Todd when he hears somebody say what is in our founding documents, that's unconstitutional. He doesn't believe in the Constitution. Chuck Todd thinks our rights emanate from the Constitution. Our Constitution is there to protect, including the Second Amendment, is there to protect our God-given rights. All right, we have the mailbag coming up. All right, let's get back to Charlie Cook's piece. This is the Second Amendment is not up for debate, even if Jimmy Kimmel himself, the conscience of America, says it is. Cook writes, at the time of the American founding, it was widely understood that there was a real danger in a government's attempting to deprive the people of what Alexander Hamilton called their original right of self-defense. This is why, when it came to writing the Constitution, the anti-federalists who feared the government's potential to become corrupt refused to sign on to a more powerful national government until they had been promised certain explicit protections. You remember, right, they had a first Constitution that wasn't strong enough, didn't have a strong enough central government, so they went back to the Constitutional Congress, and that's when they started writing the federal papers to argue we needed a stronger central government. But a lot of people were saying if we have a stronger central government, they're going to take over everything. Why would they say something like that? What on earth made them think that? Okay, but then as now, says Cook, their logic was clear. It makes no sense to allow the representatives of a free people to disarm their masters. This is what they've forgotten. We are their masters. It makes no sense to allow the people who merely represent us to disarm us, their masters. This is why this piece is so good. I mean, maybe it took an Englishman to figure this out. Reacting to this argument, we often hear advocates of gun control propose that the founders' observations are irrelevant because they could not have imagined the modern world. Isn't that the one they always say? Well, they didn't see automatic weapons, as if the government doesn't have automatic weapons too. The weapons have gone up on both sides. Cook says, I agree with the latter assertion. The founders could not have imagined the modern world. As well-read in world history as they were, there is no way that they could have foreseen just how prescient they were in insisting on harsh limitations of government power, just how far-seeing they were. In their time, tyranny was comparatively soft. Their complaints focused on underrepresentation and the capricious restriction of ancient rights. In the past century, by contrast, tyranny involved the systematic execution of entire groups of people and the enslavement of whole countries. The notion that if James Madison had foreseen the 20th century, he would have concluded that the Bill of Rights was too generous is laughable. Conservatives who are scared of tyrants often ask, could it happen here? Well, it did happen here. Jim Crow, the Ku Klux Klan, lynching, legal segregation. For a period, the South was everything a free man should fear. When Ida B. Wells was a black journalist and suffragette, I guess you'd call it. She was like an early feminist, and she was like a newspaper writer, early part of the 20th century, late part of the 19th century. When Ida B. Wells noted that a Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every black home, and it should be used for that protection which the law refuses to give, she was confirming an age-old truth. The gun is a great equalizer, and the state is a capricious beast. It is from this understanding that all conversations must proceed. The Second Amendment is not old, it is timeless. It is not unclear, it is obvious. It is not embarrassing, it is fundamental. And as much as anything else, it is a vital indicator of the correct relationship between the citizen and the state, and a reminder of the unbreakable sovereignty of the individual. Unless those calling for greater restrictions learn to acknowledge this at the outset of any public discussion, they will continue to get nowhere in their deliberations. That is a brilliant piece, and the reason that is a brilliant piece is because it shifts the conversation back to where it should should be an understanding that we want to be armed to protect us against the state. Listen, I love the cops. The cops do a great job. The cops have been shaped, as we all have been shaped, by this wonderful, liberal, free society that they live in. They respect people's rights. They really do. I mean, if you ever see cops on the beat, they really do. They play by the rules. When the new rules come down, they may not like them, but they usually play by them. Sometimes they skirt the rules if they have to, but they usually play by the rules. You don't see what you see in Catalonia. In Catalonia, they're trying to have this vote. They had this vote to become a separate state, right, to break away from Spain. And the Spanish said, well, that's illegal because our Constitution says the whole country has to vote on this. Well, that's a rigged system, right? I mean, I'm not saying Catalonia should break away. I'm not making any comment on the right of their cause, but certainly you can't have a vote to break away in which 4/5 of the country gets a vote to keep you there. That's not fair, right? That's not fair. If you want independence, there should be some way that you can address that case. So they sent in the cops, and the cops were beating people up when they tried to vote. And now they're moving toward what looks like it could become like an armed conflict. It could become a civil war. I hope not, but that's the kind of thing it's moving toward. When you look at that, how can you think that the people shouldn't have guns when the cops can come in, soldiers come in and take you out of the voting booth by force? How can you think that the people shouldn't be able to fight back? And people say, well, the American military is so tough that we could never beat them. You know, they haven't done so well in Afghanistan. It's not that easy to fight a local populace in arms. God forbid that should ever happen, but God forbid twice that it should happen and the people not be armed, okay? Listen, when Charlie says this is timeless, go back to the Bible. You know, when the Hebrews first came into the land of Israel, they had no government. They just had prophets who would tell them what God was saying through the prophets. When things got bad and they were oppressed by the Philistines, or as we call them now, the Palestinians, when things got bad and they were oppressed by, surrounding armies, they would have a guy they would call one of the judges who would rise up, sometimes a girl who would rise up and help them fight back against the surrounding people. Then they'd go back to their places and govern themselves through the word of God. You know, when the prophet Samuel got old, he appointed his sons, and their sons were corrupt. And so the people came to him and said, why can't we have kings like everybody else? And Samuel thought, well, that's not a good idea. You don't want to do that. And he went to God, and God said to Samuel, he said, don't worry. He said, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. So Samuel went back to the people and said, okay, you want to have kings? These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s and some to plow his ground and reap his harvest and make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariot. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and put them to work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. Government has always been a problem. We have the right to liberty. We have the God-given right to liberty. We have the God-given right to life. You cannot protect liberty or life unless you're armed. That's it. That's the answer. And I don't give a rat's what Jimmy Kimmel thinks, because the guy is a weasel and he's a fool. And I don't care how he cries. I don't care what he says. That's why we have the right to bear arms. I'm Andrew Klavan. This is The Andrew Klavan Show.
Oh, hooray, hurrah.
Well, hello, everybody. Dennis Prager here, the third hour of my Tuesday show, virtually every single Tuesday of the year, is titled The Ultimate Issues Hour, because the ultimate issues are the great issues of life. People get totally understandably preoccupied with the daily, 24/7 news, and family problems, and financial problems, and other daily problems preoccupy us. But the biggest issues need to be addressed, because we all have very detailed maps, but very few have an idea of where they want to go. And it doesn't help to have a detailed map if you don't have a good destination, or any destination. So that's the Ultimate Issues Hour. This is 2017. It is therefore the 500th anniversary of one of the most world-changing events that ever took place, when a priest named Martin Luther posted a document, came to be known as the 93 Theses, I believe. Yep, 95. Woo, 95 Theses. And on this anniversary, there is a new important biography of Martin Luther out, as usual, eminently readable because the author writes so well. The author is Eric Metaxas. Eric Metaxas is a colleague and a friend. He is also syndicated by Salem Radio, and this is his book. He is the author of one of the most widely known biographies of the last 50 years on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Eric Metaxas' new book, again, is Martin Luther. Eric, welcome to the Dennis Prager Show.
Wow. I feel welcome all the time when you have me on the show, but today I feel particularly welcome because, as you know, as an author, I'm launching a book today. I've written. Today, finally, the book comes out. I don't have to tell my friends. You can pre-order it. You can order it. You can walk into a store and get it. Dennis, thanks for having me on. I do think that Luther deals with the ultimate issues intensely in a way that we all, want to deal with them. And so it's one of the reasons that I'm glad, particularly today with the tragedy and everything, that we could talk about him.
I'm delighted. By the way, I'm one of those who pre-ordered because I have the hardcover and I pre-ordered the Audible. I
read the Audible. It's my voice, and I have to say that in the future I hope they let me read all my books because I know where the intonations are supposed to go since I wrote it.
You are a greater man than I. HarperCollins asked me to read my book, Still the Best Hope. I did it took me so long to just read the introduction that I gave up. I did.
Wow.
There is a professional reader who reads the book.
Professional
Yes,
reader.
it's not easy.
No, it's not easy, but it's something that I enjoy, and the people who directed me thought that I did a very good job. They kept praising me, which kept me going, because it's very hard to record a 500-page book in a little booth, reading every syllable just right.
Right.
It took a long time.
I know that. That's exactly right.
I'm glad I got to do it.
I'm glad you did. Anyway, I'm a big fan of Eric Metaxas, ladies and gentlemen. I just want you to know that the more I know Eric, the more I like him. What do you say to that, Eric?
I say we should stop getting to know each other because it can only go downhill from here.
Wait, folks.
Right here.
This is one of the reasons I love the guy. He has a dark sense of humor, and I love it. It just it makes my day.
You're very kind.
Are you?
Listen, we love each other because we joke around. We joked around so hard the other day. Well, a couple of months ago, we were together, and you and your wife Sue was there, and we were joking around so hard. I was teasing Sue. And Michael Medved, whom we love, our colleague Michael Medved, he's so sensitive that he was very upset by the hard joking. Sue enjoyed it, you enjoyed it, but Michael Medved would not believe me when I said, no, I joke with the Pragers like this. We enjoy each other. He couldn't believe that anybody could enjoy such harsh joking.
Right, especially a woman.
Especially a woman.
Yes,
but what if she's an attractive, secure woman? Of course she could take. Anyway, it was hilarious.
It was.
I tell you, hey, you want to talk about coarse joking? Martin Luther. Oh my goodness! Nobody. He makes Donald Trump look like Mike Pence. That's from me. Okay.
All right. Let's get into the book because
really,
there is so much here. So first of all, for people, this has been a guiding principle of, I don't know if I've ever said this to my audience. This is a guiding principle of all my speaking and my radio work and my writing. Never overestimate what the audience knows and never underestimate their intelligence. And that has been my guideline. So let us just set the stage here. what existed in the Christian world as of 1517?
Well, it's simple. The Christian church, so to speak, grew for 15 centuries. Actually, 10 centuries into it, the East and the West broke. So you have the Eastern Orthodox Church, and then you have the Western Church, which is centered in Rome. We know it as the Roman Catholic Church. But other than that, you had no other expressions of the Christian faith. The church, which of course became a monumental institution, was all that anybody knew of the Christian faith. And so if the church said X or Y or Z, there was nobody who could ever say, well, I think you might be halfway off on that. There was no dissent. So on some level, it's like a totalitarian state, except it wasn't like a totalitarian state. But the concept is that there will be no dissent. The little guy has no voice. The little priest has no voice. The powers that be make the decisions, and if you dissent, you could be burned at the stake or you'll be in big trouble. And so this isn't to say that the church was evil or that everybody in leadership was evil, but you can understand that it was oppressive and that if you ended up seeing something wrong, bringing it up was not an easy thing. You didn't know if you would be celebrated, thank you for telling us because we want to fix this, or if people would say to you, hey, shut up or we'll burn you at the stake. Usually it was the latter.
By the way, in that regard, I don't know the answer to this. Sometimes I ask just to get the author to comment, but I think I know the answer. I don't know the answer. This is, of course, putting aside the Spanish Inquisition, which is somewhat unique in its way. Were there a lot of people burned at the stake by the Catholic Church?
You know, I have to say, I'm not an expert on everything. I don't really know the details. There's some famous cases, you know, when you're
right. I know there are famous cases. So the question, I don't know. In other words, I don't have a dog in this race. All right, yeah. I'm Jewish, so yeah. I'm neutral between Catholics and Protestants. Yeah. But I care deeply about truth, and I totally understand where Luther came from. But I just wanted to. I don't know if that was common, but you're right. Heretics were. I mean, there's no question.
Think of it this way.
Major heretics were burned at the stake.
Burn anybody at the stake? I don't think so.
Right. Okay. Right? That's
just right. You realize that once something becomes an institution, it allies itself with power. Jesus was allied with weakness. He died. He didn't kill. He let them kill him when he could have, recanted and said anything. And so when you have an institution and human beings take control of an institution, even if it's a good institution, power comes
right.
in.
No, power. I agree. That's all correct. The corruption, everybody, even Catholics, acknowledge. Let me ask you a question. If it weren't for Luther, if Luther were never born, would there be a Protestant church in any event?
Nobody can really answer that question. I actually deal with that sideways in the book because Luther is such a singular figure. It's hard to exaggerate what a wild man he was, what a genius he was, what a courageous man he was. It's hard to exaggerate also what the effect was of what he did. I mean, when I say...
All right, hold on there, because I want to re-announce the book. Martin Luther, this is quite literally 500th anniversary of the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther was the man who did it. Nobody quite writes a biography, or very few people write, like Eric Metaxas. The book Martin Luther is up at DennisPrager.com.
I think I was craving some kind of labor, so I might find...
Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here. You don't know, folks. You have no idea. And, Eric, you don't even have to react because then we're going to get started, and I don't want to do that. But, folks, you have no idea. I would just like to just shoot the breeze right now with Eric Metaxas. But the most important thing is to talk about his new book, this great biography of Martin Luther, literally out today. And I will tell you, we will continue with him in a moment. It is time just for me to remind you about signing up with Hillsdale at PragerforHillsdale.com, where they have a whole host of new courses up there, and much more to bring to your attention at Prager for Hillsdale. They're doing such great work. And they now have free online courses and imprimis. And they are also, you should know how much good they're doing because they are providing support and guidance to classical K-12 charter schools nationwide. So please know that you are also helping the country, not only learning. So just go to pragerforhillsdale.com. And remember, these are the people that support the shows that you care about. If you're appreciative of my work, Hillsdale is one of those that makes it possible. And it's not even cost you anything, just Prager for Hillsdale. Okay, so here's the man that we always enjoy, Eric Metaxas. The book is Martin Luther. Let me ask you a question here. There's so much I'd like. I mean, I could speak to you, and I think it would hold people's interest for 3 hours. By the way, I did see you 3 hours on Book TV.
Yeah, but you were not interviewing me, so it was not as fascinating as it might have been. People can watch it. I'm proud of it. But
right.
Anytime you want to go 3 hours or 1 other hour with me, you know I'm game. I love talking to you, Dennis. I enjoy it.
Well, great. It's totally mutual. Why? Here's a challenging question. There are quite a number of fine biographies of Luther. So what did you feel was necessary to do that they hadn't done?
Well, that's kind of simple. Write the story in such a way that people really want to read it because it's a fun, great read. That is the simplest thing. In other words, there's a number of things, but I think a lot of times whenever you're dealing with big historical figures, biographies tend to be a little bit scholarly or whatever. They're not a kind of, I can't put it down read. And I know that the story of Luther is that kind of a story. It is crazy entertaining. Some of it is hilarious. There's stuff in there you will like. I defy you not to laugh out loud. There's insane stuff in there, and it's meaningful. And there's everything in there. And I wanted to tell the story afresh. It's kind of what I did with my Bonhoeffer story and with the Wilberforce story. There were other books out there, but I want to tell it as though I were telling it to a friend. It's like this is what you've got to know. And by the way, if you don't know it, you're missing something big. When I did the research on it and I got to understand what was at stake, I said, how can I have not known this? This character is no exaggeration. He's probably the most influential person who has lived, except maybe for Jesus in the last 2,000 years. If you had to pick somebody, it's insane.
That's a very interesting point.
Years ago,
that is
created the world in which we live, democracy, freedom, what you name it.
That's a very interesting point. I think you're right, by the way.
I mean, it's crazy, but it's true.
But it's so ironic because about 2 months ago, I started reading another book just called The Protestants. I don't know if you saw that book.
Yeah, sure.
And he too, he says, in effect, we are really children of the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah.
And so your point is well taken. So here's another question. Obviously, I'll have a series of questions, but here's another one. Would Luther be surprised at seeing Protestant churches?
Today?
Yes.
Well, most Protestant churches aren't even churches. I mean,
No. Then let me rephrase it. Forget today. In other words, was he out to reform Catholicism or create Protestantism?
Oh, well, but at the end of his life, he had created Protestantism, and there were many Protestant churches by the end of his life. But when he started, it didn't even enter his mind slightly to split the church, to create a new church. It wasn't even a gleam in his eye. He never wanted to do that. He was a very faithful son of the Catholic Church, a monk, devoted to the church, devoted to the idea that he was obligated by God to help the church be its true self. And so when he saw these problems and corruption, he thought, I have got to speak up because we've got to fix these problems. It's hurting the church. It's hurting the reputation of the church with the faithful. I've got to speak up. He did it from devotion to the church. And when you read, I quote some of his letters, he is humble to the point of obsequious in writing to the Pope and to others. And this is a guy who, when he wanted to be blunt, he was blunt. but he had respect for them and respect for the church. So anybody says that he was a firebrand, a troublemaker, I mean, he looks like that later in life, but the reality is no, he was not those things.
So what could the church have done to prevent the rise of Protestantism?
You know, I only tune into the show to hear Dennis Prager say the word "what." I love that. Forgive me. I love your pronunciation of the word "what." Okay, what could he done? It's really simple.
Wait a minute.
Actually,
what
I've
are you
got
talking
an
about?
With people. I'm sorry.
What are you talking about?
What? You hit the nail on the head. The Catholic Church handled things about as badly as you could have handled them. In other words, here's a man who was willing to compromise, was willing to do anything but they put him in such a corner that, he was basically trying to say a few things humbly, and their response was, in effect, shut up, recant what you've said. If you don't, you'll be declared a heretic and probably burned at the stake. And okay. So he was begging them to give him an opportunity to explain himself, to have a dialogue with them, to show him what he meant. And he, in this famous moment at the poorly named Diet of Worms, he stands up and he says, if you can show me, please show me where I'm in error. If I've made a mistake, please show me. If you show me, I will recant. I will repent publicly. But if you don't show me, if you just tell me shut up, here I stand, I can do no other. His famous words, I'm powerless. I fear God more than I fear you burning me at the stake. I can't just make stuff up or recant stuff when in my mind I believe it's true. I mean, it's an amazing moment of courage, and it's a moment where, if you really want to talk about influence in the culture, truth and power had never been separated until that moment. In other words, they lived in a world, in the medieval world, where the power structures determined what is truth and what is not truth. There was no such thing as somebody dissenting and saying, I think you might be wrong or whatever. There was no daylight between the power structure of the church, of this institution, and truth.
All right, back in a moment. The book is Martin Luther, Eric Metaxas, the author. Hello, everybody. Dennis Prager here. Eric Metaxas is my guest. The book, Martin Luther, is up at DennisPrager.com. Today is the actual launch of the book. I'm honored to have him on. He's a great writer, and it's a huge issue. Martin Luther, of course, is the dissenting Catholic priest who in 1517 posted 95 theses on his church. He was a Catholic priest. He wanted to reform the church and ended up founding a non-Catholic movement called Protestantism. And that is, of course, much of the formation of the Western world outside of the Catholic Church, of course, which also gets credit. But we are, in many ways, in the United States and in many of the Western industrialized democracies, children of Protestantism. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. I was not raised as a Protestant, but it's fair to say. And you know, what you said about Luther just a second ago, you could also say that Jesus, who was a faithful Jew, never wanted to found his own religion. He just wanted to kind of, bring people back to God. And people say he founded Christianity. He didn't set out to found a religion. Luther didn't set out to found a religion. At the end of the day, hopefully, we're all searching for the truth. And then it gets labeled this and that. But I think that Luther, he was shocked when the church did not accommodate him and forced him out. It was not something he had sought to do. And that's one of the shocking things in my learning about the story, is to see how easily it might have turned out otherwise. If the Pope had been a wise man, which he was not, and the people around him had not been corrupt bureaucrats working for the deep state, if I can use the term, if they'd been anything but that, you would have seen a very different thing. Because, of course, in the last 500 years, the Catholic Church has implemented many of the Reformation ideas of Luther, but it took 500 years for them to catch on.
Was Luther challenging the primacy of the Pope?
Yes, he was, and it's interesting because whatever he said was Catholic. In other words, he wasn't saying I've got different ideas. He was trying to say, look, we have always believed that the Pope is important and this and that, but you can't make him out to be a dictator. You have to have an ultimate authority, and the ultimate authority is the Scripture. If the Church is veering away from the Scripture, you got to go with the Scripture. Just his cheekiness in saying that, it was kind of like, no, we don't say that here. Whack, he got it. He was not. They didn't say you have a good point. He had a great point, but it became very political and very messy, and before you know it, the truth was nowhere.
So is the ultimate revolution here that, so is it ultimately sola scriptura, only Scripture? There is no mediating authority. I read God's word, and that is sufficient?
No, that's what I think people take away from it. And I think that's not true, because really what that does, I write about this in my epilogue, it points us straight to subjectivity. There's no truth. Everybody's got his own truth. Luther was never saying that. What he was simply saying was that what the Scripture says, if we find daylight between the Scripture and what the Church is teaching, we have to correct course. They didn't like to hear that. And, of course, there is that implication that, hey, who are you? Everybody's got his own ideas and this and that. But he was not advocating for his own ideas. He was really hoping that they would join him in a dialogue and everybody looking at this more closely, because he was sure the truth would win. And they didn't do that. They just told him, shut up and go away. And it's such a pity,
right,
really.
But to be fair, that what you said he didn't want is exactly what happened. That is the reason there were so many Protestant denominations. Everybody reads the Scripture.
I say that in my book, Dennis. I say that. In other words, that everything they predicted would happen, of course, did happen. But the question is this: at what price do we have freedom? This is about freedom of ideas. It's about freedom of religion. At some point, you know and I know, it's much safer to be in a totalitarian state. Nobody steals, nobody, but at some point, freedom has a price. Freedom is messy. And he was saying we cannot shirk freedom in this. We have to have the freedom to say what is right. It ties right into our founders, into all the ideas that we talk about every day.
All right. We'll be back in a moment. It's very, very, very important. And the book is, of course, Martin Luther today, or really this year, of course, and we're almost to the day of the 500th anniversary of the start of the Reformation. All right, everybody. Dennis Prager here. This is the Ultimate Issues Hour. Can't get more ultimate than how did we get Protestantism from Catholicism. There was in the West only one church, the Catholic Church. And then 500 years ago, almost to the day, a priest named Martin Luther posted 95 theses on a church wall, and then all of history changed. Well, let me deal with, because I'm going to be asked about this, and I know you expect it, and I read all your pages on the subject. At the end of his life, he wrote truly horrific things about Jews, that the synagogues should be burned, and a whole host of just truly vile things, which the Nazis popularized to defend their Jew hatred. Said, look, our hero, Martin Luther, who was a German priest and then the father of Protestantism, look at what he said about the Jews, so we should burn their churches and burn their synagogues and kill them and so on. He didn't say kill them exactly, but anyway, let me ask you a few questions on this. How near the end of his life did he write these things?
Yeah, it's horrific, isn't it? It's just beyond horrific. He was. It was 3 years before he died. He was 62 when he died, so it was 3 years before that. I wish God had taken him before he was able to write those words, because he said, you got to understand, he was so outspoken and brash. I'm not joking that he makes Trump look like Mike Pence. I mean, he said stuff that about everybody. It doesn't make it okay what he said about the Jews, but the point is he said things just like that about the Catholics, about the Pope, about the Protestants he disagreed with, about the Turks, the Muslims. I mean, he was absolutely unhinged Do you hear those sirens? That proves I'm in New York City.
Oh, my God. You're scary.
They're coming for me.
That is exactly what went on in my mind.
Well, of course. It's a great minds think alike, Dennis. Okay, so the thing is that you have to put it in context. If some people
wait, forgive me. I want to defend what you're saying. This is on page 419 of his book. This is what he said. What year did he die?
He died. He was 62 years old. He died in 1543, I believe.
No. Because in 1545 he wrote something about that. Anyway,
46. I'm sorry.
All right, 46. Okay, so listen to this, folks. A year before he died.
No. He wrote this in 1543.
No. What I'm going to read from your book is about the Pope.
Yeah.
The Pope is not and cannot be the head of the Christian church. Instead, he is the head of the accursed church of all the worst scoundrels on earth, a vicar of the devil, an enemy of God, an adversary of Christ, a destroyer of Christ's churches, a teacher of lies, blasphemies, and idolatries, an arch church thief and church robber of the keys and all the goods of both the church and the temporal lords, a murderer of kings and inciter of all kinds of bloodshed, a brothel keeper over all brothel keepers and all vermin, even that which cannot be named, an antichrist, a man of sin, and a genuine werewolf.
And a genuine werewolf.
Yeah. So I just
He
said
way worse stuff, Dennis.
Right.
He said way worse stuff about the Pope than that. That was just what he said a year before he died. What he said about the Jews in 1543, it's vile, but again, you got to put it in context. He said incredibly vile stuff. He got sucked into political stuff, and you have to understand this is the most important thing. The concept of religious liberty and religious freedom was founded by what Martin Luther did. But Martin Luther, just to prove that, he wasn't a saint, Martin Luther himself didn't understand the outworking of this issue. So he was still living at a time when if you were a Catholic living among Protestants, they would kick you out, they would burn down your church, whatever it is. If you were a Protestant living among Catholics, the Catholics would try to kill you, they'd kick you out. In other words, there was no religious liberty. So at the end of his life, he gets this crazy idea that the Jews among us are trying to draw people away from the true God, and we've got to get rid of them, we've got to drive them out. But the point is that the Turks are driving the Christians out, the Christians are driving the Turks out, the Catholics are driving the Protestants out. So in context, again, it doesn't make it nice, but in context, you understand this was a very different world. And so the Nazis brilliantly, with the wicked genius of the devil, found these writings. And by the way, I'm looking on my wall, I have 6 feet of books of Martin Luther's writings. They picked out an eighth of an inch, pulled it out and said, hey, we can use this. And they published it. And so now everybody asks, what about Luther and the Jews? What they ignore is that before that in his life and after, this is the really crazy thing, after, and I quoted in my book, he said positive things about the Jews. He says the Jews didn't crucify Christ. We did. I did. I mean, that is amazing. So he's a contradiction of contradictions, and that's one of the reasons I think he's such an entertaining figure. But of course, that is as black a mark in his book as ever there could be.
Well, you said something very touching and powerful. If only he had died 3 years earlier. It seems that at the end he wrote stuff that he wouldn't have written earlier.
I think that's true. He was very ill. I mean, he became increasingly cranky, and this happens.
By the way, he left the priesthood, right?
Yeah,
and he married.
Yeah, he married. But you know what the issue is? The aches and pains. He didn't have relief factor. Can I say that?
You're the best, Eric.
He didn't
Metaxas.
have relief factor, Dennis, and the aches and pains he had. But it's actually true, right? When you have aches and pains, and because I promote relief factor on my show and I take it every day, you get cranky with aches and pains. He had all kinds of stuff going on with his body. I mean, I detailed it in the book.
You have now given me ad copy. If only Luther had relief factor, he would have avoided a lot of embarrassing things that he wrote. Eric Metaxas' book, Martin Luther, he is unique, Eric. Both. Luther is unique and Metaxas is unique. The book is up at DennisPrager.com. And by the way, I think biography is the most enjoyable way to learn history. I think Eric should give a course on Luther. What do you say, Eric?
Yeah, okay.
All right, that was hard.
Twist my arm.
Apparently I had to. I just want to know, right now, do you have a handkerchief in your breast pocket?
No, because I'm going to go for a run, and when I go for a run in Central Park, I do not wear a jacket.
You were an Uzi.
What?
An Uzi, a submachine gun.
No.
Okay, no, I was just curious.
No, you're thinking of New York in the 70s.
That's
man.
correct,
I think
yes.
Giuliani cleaned it up, and now there is very little crime.
No, that's absolutely true, and I'm very happy for you, but there's still many sirens. Folks, the book is Martin Luther by Eric Metaxas, who writes these just terrific biographies. So there's so much to talk about, and we should do a part 2. So let me just ask you, how much reading do you do to write a biography of someone about whom there is so much written and who wrote himself so much?
Well, there's no answer to that. If it weren't for publishing deadlines and other things, I'd still be reading. I think that's one of the things that I'm very clear about, Dennis, is that I'm not an academic. I write on a popular level for regular readers. I'm not trying to impress my fellow academics because I'm myself not an academic. I have no fellow academics. And so I don't want to write a dissertation. I want to tell the story in a way that is compelling and entertaining, and you learn from it. I mean, I learned so much. You learn from history and stuff, and and to do that, it's a very different thing. In other words, there's so many good biographies on Luther. A lot of them are outdated. There's some new ones. They have different angles or whatever. I don't really take an angle. I want to give you the straight, basic, everything you always want to know about Martin Luther. Here's the story, and so. I read a lot, but I could have read. There's so much more. It could be, and there are people who spend their lifetimes reading on Luther.
Yes, well, you do that magnificent job. If you could meet Luther, is there a question you'd like to ask him?
Yes, I just don't know what that question is. No, I think I know people like Luther. Where there's sort of no talking to him at some point. His best friends, I mean, it's kind of like Trump. His best friends were telling Luther not to tweet, right? Like they're saying, listen, you do not need to be so abrasive.
All right.
And he would sort of agree, but he would do it again, and he would do it again. So his best friends couldn't get through.
All right, we have 10 seconds. Do you want me to announce your book, or do you want to finish your story?
Do I have a book out called Martin Luther, available today in stores? Do I? Yes, I do. Thank you.
Eric Metaxas, you're one of a kind.